Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives? Your families and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
To wake up, there is one way. Be fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hi.
A lot of words have been had over the question, does Palpatine fuck? You know, what does he like? But I can tell you definitively, Palpatine's a foot guy. He likes feet. He loves the Imperial system. Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix.
Fuck off.
Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, a Star Wars podcast that talks about politics, history, and occasionally topics other than genocide. Not today, though.
Damn.
I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller, and with me is my co-host, Sophia Dunstan.
Hi. I do not like genocide.
Far cry from last episode.
What was last episode?
You said we should kill civilians if we didn't like them, I think was what you said. Do you stand by that still?
Yes, and I also stand by the fact that that is not genocide.
Okay. All right. I'm
really disqualifying myself from public office more every episode, aren't I?
That's really what this show is for. I think being on a Star Wars podcast should generally disqualify anyone from being in public office.
Being on a podcast, period.
You're right, and you should
Unless
say
it's
it.
like, I don't know, an NPR podcast or something, but that's not really a podcast. That's a radio show on podcast.
Yeah, if it's technically a radio show that gets uploaded as a podcast, you're fine. Right out of the gate here, I want to thank Miranda here, David Kane, Jinkster99, Dylan McGuire, M. Diaz, and especially Joel Miranda for generously supporting us over on Patreon. Y'all are the circular blade emitter track that keeps this lightsaber of a show spinning.
Very esoteric.
You'll get it. If you're interested in early access to the show, episode outtakes, the Daughters of Ferrix Discord server, and our new bonus episode where Sophie and I wade into the ignorant nonsense of Ben Shapiro's Star Wars opinions.
They're not good. They are funny, though.
With some interesting contradictions mixed in. Check us out at patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix and pitch in. So, this episode is special because while I'm presenting the topic, the script was a collaborative effort between myself and a friend of the show, Harrison. Harrison and I met in the Star Wars Explained book club, and he is a powerhouse of knowledge. He did a lot of the historical and factual groundwork for this episode, as well as coming up with some really great connective tissue that I think has made it really solid. So, let's get into it. We're going to play a little visualization game. So close your eyes and humor me for a moment, okay? You too, listener, unless you're driving.
I mean, it's a free country.
I
It
will
is
not
against
be
the law
held-
to drive with your eyes closed.
I will not be held responsible for any car accidents that occurred during the course of this episode. There you go.
I will.
I jinxed it for you. Imagine you're part of a moisture farming family on Tatooine. You spent the previous evening checking evaporators, maintaining your droids, and now this morning, like most mornings, you've taken a shipment of water to Mos Eisley. It's not too hot a day, and the sky diffuses the bright light of the twin suns overhead. Your distributor gave you a bad deal. Water prices are down this time of year, but nonetheless, you've got enough for the market and maybe a little left over. So you walk down the sandy spaceport street, seeing hundreds milling to and fro, all about their business. When suddenly, a black shuttle, like a bird of prey, swoops slowly overhead. People start to clear away. Jawa traders pack up their wares, heeding the ill omen. The shuttle lands, folding its wings in the middle of the street. People shuffle towards the margins as they clear the way for those that descend its boarding ramp. 3 warriors, dressed in black leather armor, not carrying blasters that you can see, but clearly moving to kill. From your place behind a market stall, you're caught staring. You make eye contact with one of them, a young woman with braided hair and a severe expression on her face, a predator on the hunt. You avert your eyes so quickly you're not even sure she really looked at you. They make their way down the road. People attempt to go about their business, to pretend nothing's amiss, but no one can look away as they walk past you into a bar, a place you and your friends go every weekend. They stroll in, as if they own the place, and start a conversation with the bartender. The one who looks to be in charge, a Powan man with a bald white head and reddish-black markings under his eyes, speaks with a voice like ice. No one in the bar is drinking or talking. Everyone is silent, looking down at tables, avoiding his gaze. He accuses the barkeep of hiding a Jedi there in the saloon. You've never seen a Jedi. You've barely heard of them. But you know the Empire hunts for them, and that with their armor and bearing, these off-worlders must have the entire might of the Imperial war machine behind them. The Pound's tone rises. The braided woman attacks the barkeep, but at the very last second, a bar patron intervenes, outing himself as the Jedi thereafter. There's a scuffle. The woman lights a red lightsaber and nearly cleaves her quarry in two, but somehow, impossibly, the Jedi gets away. The next morning, they herd civilians into the square and offer a reward for information leading to the apprehension of the Jedi, an offer that comes alongside the threat of retaliation. The older red-headed woman who sells you your produce speaks up. She proclaims that the Empire has no jurisdiction on Tatooine. Everyone around her goes rigid with fear, and they involuntarily gasp as a red lightsaber is lit again, severing the woman's hand from her wrist. The young woman with the braids threatens the life of a farmer and his family, holding her weapon humming to his throat. The following day, the body of the Jedi hangs above the Mos Eisley street, strung up as a warning that every last man, woman, and child with a connection to the Force will be hunted down by the Imperial Inquisitorius. That's our topic.
Inquisitors.
It's Inquisitors. What did you think about Inquisitors, Sophie? Did you know that they existed before Obi-Wan Kenobi?
I did know that they existed before Obi-Wan Kenobi.
How?
I saw one in Rebels one time.
Was it the Grand Inquisitor, or was it like the Eighth Brother or something?
I don't know.
You don't
man.
know? Sophie has not
No.
seen Rebels.
Not all of it, no, just some.
It's a good show. The Inquisitorius was a group of Force-sensitive operatives that served under the Galactic Empire. They wore scary black armor, wielded red double-bladed lightsabers that spun around the hilt, and traipsed across the galaxy hunting down and killing Jedi. The genocide that kicked off the Empire, it's the Inquisitorius who keep that ball rolling. Their formation seems to have been planned from even before Order 66, and broadly speaking, every Inquisitor we've seen in the books, comics, and on-screen was a former Jedi. Palpatine himself selected several malleable Jedi to offer the role to, including the Grand Inquisitor, who was chosen by Palpatine to survive Order 66. Other Inquisitors were captured and tortured to turn them to the dark side, and some even joined willingly, surrendering their own identity for participation in the hunt. After they proved their skill through combat and missions, they all got custom black armor stamped with the black and white Imperial cog, and were then made to bleed lightsaber crystals, pouring all their pain and suffering into the kyber to corrupt its color to a raging red. Their unique spinny lightsabers were obviously pretty dangerous, but they allowed them to be highly unpredictable in combat, and also fly.
Of course, because why not?
It's a Force thing, you know?
I do like, first of all, that they're all capos.
We're getting there.
Okay. Also, I do wonder if, like, far in the Star Wars future, right, there's, like, a meme, and it has 3 Inquisitors standing there, and it's like, no one expects the Imperial Inquisition.
Haha, we're funny. Haha, we're so clever.
She's not happy with me. She's being mean.
All right. Some Inquisitors, like the 10th Brother, had more unique sabers, while others preferred to just use one blade at a time. They might also use droids, like the 7th Sister, who used probe droids to collect information, manipulate other droids, and basically tase opponents. Some Inquisitors were especially skilled starfighter pilots, using early models of the TIE Advanced, like the 8th Brother did. Along with the armor and lightsaber, an Inquisitor gets a title, one of these numbered brother or sister names that they're referred to in lieu of anything else. Despite this supposed siblinghood, the Inquisitorius wasn't exactly a familial organization. Inquisitors were expected to compete both against existing members and initiates who had yet to take a title. They participated in violent combat, duels, and even attacks outside of the ring. They also had to survive fights with Darth Vader, who tested every single candidate, often seriously injuring them as part of his instruction.
Oh, that sounds difficult.
It's not good.
Because Darth Vader is, like, you know, even in his decrepit form.
Decrepit.
I don't know. Anakin Skywalker, who is one of the more fearsome Jedi.
Yeah, he was one of the more roided
Battle-y.
fellas. Yeah. It's not good. Not every single Inquisitor undergoes every step of this process, but it's an accurate enough framework to give us an idea of how these guys worked. Vader himself was the leader of the Imperial Inquisition. He was in charge of their organization, and much of his early galactic reputation was drawn from inquisitionary work. Under Vader was the role of Grand Inquisitor, very much a middle manager position over the numbered ones. The Inquisitors were eventually headquartered on the ocean moon Nur, a satellite of Mustafar, in a facility dubbed the Fortress Inquisitorius.
They're just kind of right up the way.
They're close enough that Vader doesn't kill them every day. you know? Like he has to go out of his way to bully
to
them.
go murder them.
Vader fucking hates them. For good reason. They're assholes.
Because there can only be two.
That's not the reason. Vader's just a bitch, you know?
Because he doesn't have a dick.
He's jealous.
Vader just like looking at them like, you and your genitals.
You and your functioning genitals. Oh, God. Most of the fortress was underwater and included a prison block, hangar, and complex defense and security systems. It was a place of training, but also one of planning, interrogation, and execution. It had a fairly extensive on-site staff for both military and organizational support.
That sounds like a terrible job, by the way, like working in the evil like Inquisition dungeon.
The underwater, like...
where like Darth Vader is regularly around and just being an asshole. These people are just like dying and getting replaced like every week. Like,
And
this is a punishment detail.
Fortress Vader seems like it doesn't really have
Staff.
much of a military staff. Fortress Inquisitorius has so many guys, like so many people, and guards and troopers and...
The life expectancy of those guys is like less than like bomber pilots on the Western Front.
The Inquisitorius' mission was simple: to hunt Force sensitives however they could, in order to ensure their extermination. These guys are bad news. They went after Jedi in hiding, refugees, slaughtered innocent families, kind of for the hell of it. Inquisitors ought never to return from a mission empty-handed, so they also sought out and claimed Jedi and Sith texts, records, and artifacts, including lightsabers. How did the Empire turn the Jedi from a galactic influence to a myth in a couple of decades? The threat of the Inquisitorius was a big part of that. We also know that, aside from the hunting of Jedi and collecting of artifacts, the Inquisitorius facilitated Project Harvester, which revolved around the capture of young Force sensitives. These were found via Imperial information networks, though also through the Imperial Academy system.
To turn them into Force Scoop like they wanted to do to Baby Yoda.
While it's implied that abductees are trained to become Inquisitors, we have yet to actually see that evidence. We don't actually know what they do with these kids.
They goop them.
Just like Baby Yoda was turned into goop.
They tried to. They were sucking all the Force out of him to...
They weren't trying to turn him to goop, Sophie.
What were they trying to do?
They were trying to figure out, essentially, Force-sensitive cloning.
Oh.
All right,
Well, they were
moving on.
trying to goop him, and that's what I will continue to say.
It seems like Imperial support and focus on the Inquisition waned as years drew on. Individual Inquisitors were killed in battle with Jedi, and we don't appear to see anyone taking their places. Children were still being kidnapped in 4BBY, but we don't hear about Project Harvester past that point. The last active Inquisitors we see in the timeline died in combat around the same year. By 0BBY, the Empire considered the Jedi religion all but eradicated.
As Tarkin, you know.
That's the reason. That's why that's on Wikipedia.
We eradicated the Jedi. Yeah.
You are all that remains of that ancient religion or whatever.
Wrong religion.
Does Tarkin know that? Does Tarkin?
He should. He's a smart
I'm pretty
guy.
sure he does. But like, you know,
I mean, not that smart because he stayed on the Death Star, but
not that smart. We've read his fucking doctrine.
we did kind of own Tarkin with facts and logic, didn't we? Tarkinites
Daughters of Ferrix
owned it.
destroys Imperial Grand Moff. Yeah.
What's our equivalent of woke? Like, what would we like? You know, Ben Shapiro and all his
Fascist,
conies-
probably. We call a lot of things fascist.
Yeah, we do.
And like, listen, I'm not careful about the way I use the word fascist because I think at this point I don't need to be. I used to be much more so, but like
Everyone
I don't
is
know.
fascist now.
It's
very in vogue at the moment.
yeah, not to be all everyone I don't like is fascist, but everyone I don't like is fascist. We don't really know what happened to any Inquisitors in training, kids left over from Harvester, or those few Inquisitors we don't see die on screen. It's entirely possible that the Empire had them all liquidated, since their job may as well be done, right? Metatextually, the Inquisitorius was technically established in Legends before their canon introduction in Star Wars Rebels, but they were pretty different. The Legends Inquisitorius was much more of an order, with High Inquisitors, Apprentice Inquisitors, and several different Grand Inquisitors.
So it was the evil Jedi.
Yeah, kinda. But frankly, Legends Inquisitors weren't used much in story materials. The Imperial Inquisition was this thing that got a one-off mention, and then was largely fleshed out for the sake of the Wizards of the Coast TTRPG Dark Side sourcebook. A lot of the ranks of this Inquisitorius were filled out by retconning old villains into it, dudes from older comics and novels, evil sorcerers, dark Jedi, etc. This is also where we got the idea of a creepy Dark Side Inquisition HQ.
Or as I will be referring to it henceforth, the Inquisitorial Goon Game.
Most legend stories were based after Return of the Jedi, so you want villains with the same sort of chops as Vader to pit the good guys against. So Inquisitors in Legends could hypothetically be really powerful. They may command capital ships or fleets, and may have even held some political sway under the Empire. Canon also uses Inquisitors as a way to give dark-side counterparts, but it sets these conflicts during the reign of the Empire. So Inquisitors are dangerous opponents, but they're not unbeatable. We see across Fallen Order, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Rebels, the Inquisitors come first to symbolize the Imperial threat against the Jedi, and serve as something of an appetizer to Vader, who takes the role of final boss in those stories. The Inquisitors in canon are also significantly more toyetic. They've got numbered names, unique lightsabers and outfits, and are all very much distinct characters, because they've had lots more spotlight through primary antagonist roles. So let's talk about some real world shit now, because unavoidably, we have to bring up the Spanish Inquisition. Yes.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay. We got it out. We're good. The Spanish Inquisition originally formed in the late 15th century after the Reconquista, a years-long political project where Christian kingdoms in the north of the Iberian Peninsula slowly pushed south, dislodging local Muslim leaders as the Christians sought to unite the peninsula under their rule. The pair who ultimately succeeded in this were the Catholic monarchs Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon.
Who united to become Spain.
Who united to become super Catholic.
This was widely regarded as a bad move.
All right. They were the leaders who brought the Inquisition into being through dialogue with the Pope. Pope mention. Pope mention.
I'm still laughing a little bit at super Catholic.
Super Catholic. That was the joke you made 2 weeks ago. You joked about super rebel. And so I kind of thought you were going to make that joke again. The monarch's mission was one of unification and social change. They sought to accomplish this through what we would call negative integration. Negative integration is where you focus on fostering traits in a population by rejecting those who don't conform to those ideas, creating a sense of identity through what someone is not. It's a tactic that's proved critical to the act of nation building in the modern era. So, despite the Catholic monarchs and many before them tolerating and even accepting both Jewish and Islamic people in the supposedly Christian lands, the aftermath of the Reconquista saw this tolerance dramatically change. First came the expulsion of the Jewish population, and the Inquisition rooted out those who were suspected to still be Jewish in secret, or who had converted but were still under suspicion. Years later, it was the Muslims' turn. Many were expelled, and those who converted to Christianity were, again, under constant scrutiny. Across these exiles, hundreds of thousands were forced to flee abroad, often finding shelter and new lives within North African Muslim-dominated states, or even leaving for the Americas, whose quote-unquote discovery and exploitation began around the same time as the Spanish Inquisition's founding.
If that's true, and there were a lot of, people who had previously moved there as when the Moors were in charge and then leaving now that the Catholics are doing what Catholics do best. That's a joke. I don't know. There could be like mosque in Mexico City from 1500.
I bet there is, well...
Earthquakes, fire, the Inquisition, yeah.
All natural disasters. I bet there is some kind
All
of...
acts of God, clearly.
Jesus. I do believe there is some kind of lost, like South American Islamic, if not faith tradition, then history that just isn't talked about.
Or Muslim Mormons, right? Like, they came to America. Like, this is like the...
Religious pilgrimage doesn't make you a Mormon.
Quiet.
Or I guess religious...
no, I'm saying that
refugee.
I'm saying that they're going to like have if Muslim people had come to America in like 1820, right? They definitely would have created Islamic Mormonism, where like Muhammad secretly visited America.
Okay, that does actually make a lot of sense. I see what you're saying. You move to a new land and you start writing fan fiction. God, honestly, real for that. Those who went to the New World were often safe for a time, but inquisitions were eventually established there too, usually to help root out the heresy of native religions and resistance to Spanish rule. And Spain wasn't the only power to hold inquisitions around that time. The Roman Inquisition was noted for being particularly aggressive in their tactics, but the Spanish Inquisition remains the best known to this day as a result of its longevity, deep association with a state that became a significant imperial force in later years, and Monty Python.
Thank you, England's one enduring cultural export.
We can draw another parallel to the Inquisitorius in the practice of witch hunting, whose heyday emerged amidst the dramatic social and cultural changes rocking pre-modern Europe.
It's because of the plague. It's always because of the plague.
Well, like, bad shit's happening all around you, right? The economic order is radically changing. What better option than to blame all the bad things in your life on the supernatural?
Because women.
Because women. That's true. That's true,
They're
actually.
bad.
Everything bad is because of women, and everything good is because of women. women. You owe your existence to a woman. Tell your mom you love her.
Or that you don't, depending on how much of a...
Yeah. If it's proportion, if it's the. Prior to this period, the Catholic Church denied the existence of witches, since witchcraft implied gaining special powers from a source other than God. There was also a degree of healthy intellectual skepticism around the idea.
The Pope is just like, hey, what the fuck are you talking about, huh?
There's not even witches. Why would you say there's even witches here?
Hey.
There's only God here. That's how the Pope sounds.
The Pope has like a really bad New Jersey accent. I can't wait till we have the first American Pope because he's definitely going to be from Newark.
The world would be better for that, I'll be honest with you.
Just like, in nomine Patri Filii Spiritus Sancti. What's a guy gotta do to get some communion wine around here?
Belief in witches exploded after the 1486 publication of one wildly and unfortunately popular text, Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches.
I'm familiar with this text, actually. It's a great name.
Hammer of Witches was bad. It was expressly violent in the way it called for a war against witches and included handy tools to help identify them, which had the consequence of narrowing the people who would be considered witches, people of any gender, to almost exclusively women.
If it floats like a duck, it's a witch.
All of this led to a sharp increase in misogynistic witch belief and hunts across Europe, though they only really reached a fever pitch under figures like the infamous English witchfinder general, Matthew Hopkins, and of course, across the Atlantic in the Salem witch trials, which Americans love to use in pop history and culture.
The idea of like a guy who's the witchfinder general?
Witchfinder majors are pretty good general. Like witchfinder sergeant, I'm sorry, witchfinder as a prefix is excellent. Or I guess would it be a prefix?
I think it's like an attorney general, right? Because they're like...
Witchfinders general is the plural.
Witchfinders.
Witch hunts were tragic. Many often older women were accused of witchcraft and therefore heresy, and were then usually tortured into admitting it. Cruelty that, of course, Hammer of Witches endorsed as just in the face of evil. Many died during torture, but plenty survived and got to be killed afterwards once they were found guilty. Occasionally, though, courts did their job. Some accusations of witchcraft saw years of monitoring and investigation, and at times, spurious claims were dismissed, usually when prominent male members of society were implicated. In the mid-1500s, when German healer Anna Megeler was brought before the town council, she stated that she had both taught witchcraft to and learned from the banker Anton Fugger. Fugger was a major financier to the Habsburg royal family. So...
Bad job, bad idea, don't do that.
The council dismissed the investigation, but escapes like this were rare, unfortunately. Again, particularly for women. There were male victims of witch hunts, but it was disproportionately women, to an obscene degree. Popular ideas regarding inquisitorial and witch hunting groups have, naturally, survived into our culture and come to influence how media like Star Wars represents them. The Imperial Inquisitorius, as a result, firmly falls into the category of grotesque medievalism.
I like the box.
Yeah, I just did a
I like the
rectangle.
box that Ellie just drew there.
Grotesque medievalism.
Grotesque medievalism.
Medievalism is the study of basically what popular culture thinks is medieval. And there are a few divisions and subcategories therein. Grotesque medievalism, then, describes a grim, repressive past, the medieval period as lacking sophistication or understanding.
The movies will just like be extremely grimdark and like everything is brown.
Everyone's dying from the plague at all times.
Everyone is just like constantly being showered with shit from above.
This is the era of savage Viking slaughters, of the unstoppable waves of the barbarian Mongols, and the repression of new ideas by a monolithic religious institution. The Catholic Church out here capturing, torturing, and wantonly executing heretics through the use of more and more hideous methods. The Dark Ages classically depicts an ignorant, dreary Europe, one which lacked knowledge that it was only really eventually given through events like the Renaissance or the Enlightenment.
Yeah, because all those books, they just kind of sat around and nobody read them.
Everyone
was just like, reading's for losers. And then someone was like, reading is not for losers. And that's how the Enlightenment happened.
So all of that is obviously not
bullshit.
Really true. Yeah. Europe had a great deal of access to information and knowledge through sophisticated trade routes and their own local innovations and developments of old Roman era ideas. It's also, not correct to paint cultures who were traditionally threats to major European nations as barbarian savages, bringing nothing of value or interest into the world.
Except the French.
For all their impacts on Spanish society and the native populations of the Americas, the Spanish Inquisition wasn't exactly the bloody institution it would be later characterized as. For starters, they notified a region as much as a month in advance of their arrival. This was in order to prepare the people living there, to ensure that when they arrive, there are reports and accusations against against others waiting there. And by that time, confessions of minor sins could have already been dealt with by local officials. You would expect the Spanish Inquisition. Additionally, they were a deeply bureaucratic organization. An inquisitor was not judge, jury, and executioner, but just the questioner, with others fulfilling the range of roles required for that tribunal system. The Spanish Inquisition did torture, and yeah, that was part of their negative effect on society, as it was for all inquisitions. But they were actually the first such group to reject confessions acquired by torture, and their punishments for those found guilty were rarely death. Public penance was often all that was required instead. But people did die. Over a period of more than 300 years, the Spanish Inquisition is estimated to have directly killed anywhere between 1,000 to 30,000 people, with many estimates sitting on the lower...
That's not that bad.
No, 300 years, and the estimates kind of go lower. They're not good guys or anything, don't get me wrong, but, you know, let's keep it in perspective.
Pretty benign, honestly.
Again, on the medievalism track, many of the most famous inquisitions and inquisitorial bodies operated well after the medieval period, with witch hunting becoming common only in the 16th to 18th centuries. But the imagery and the ideas such groups represent feel authentically medieval to an audience trained by films and books and video games to think of the past as specifically juxtapositionally worse and today as better. It's Enlightenment propaganda.
Yeah, it's also kind of true.
I mean...
No.
It is incorrect. No. It is incorrect to view history as a line that gets better.
Oh, yeah. But I was going to say, to an extent, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but even like the poorest people on the planet can generally get access to like penicillin now.
Yeah, no, there are some things that are better about now. Let's be clear. It sucked to live back then. It just didn't suck quite in the ways that we understand it in popular culture.
Or as universally as we think it did. Like,
yes.
People think if you're a medieval peasant, it's like miserable and you die at 32. Not so much. You're going to work hard. But the great thing about being Catholic in the Middle Ages is that you get a shit ton of days off because like every Saint's Day is a feast and you get to go to mass and get super drunk with your buddies.
And you don't have a boss.
Yeah.
Feudalism is different. Feudalism is not always better. In a lot of ways, feudalism is worse, but feudalism is different.
And like also you did live to like your 60s and 70s most of the time. Life averages are dragged down by the fact that a lot of children would die.
You got to keep in mind.
If you make it past 5, you're probably going to live to 60.
If you're listening to this podcast, your life is significantly better than most people on Earth. There are people on Earth who their lives are not too much better than they would have been during the medieval period. So, perspective.
Although that proportion is rapidly decreasing, thankfully.
And that's the goal. Let's fucking hope, you know?
Crazy rapidly, like since the 1960s.
In those sorts of ways,
like,
the last 100 years have been pretty good.
Half of it is China, the other half is everywhere else, you know.
Anyway, we can see those ideas of an overblown, grotesque medievalism pretty clear in Star Wars' Inquisition. While the Inquisitorius lacks the same bureaucratic depth as the Spanish one, the use of the prefix titles sister and brother is very much coded from Catholic religious terms, using sibling-focused language to describe clergy.
Oh, for monks and nuns.
Monks and nuns moment. Inquisitors wear menacing armor, sometimes formed out of leather or worn with intimidating headgear.
So did these guys have like a kink undertone?
One could argue that a lot of kink culture has grotesque medieval undertones. That's an interesting perspective.
I was just thinking like, ooh, scary weather. Like,
think of the way in which like a lot of BDSM culture draws from like torture imagery, right? Kind of dressed up and played out quite differently. Let's be clear. But like,
well, most people are not being like,
there.
You know, drawn and quartered and
yeah, not the same, but you draw on those aesthetics for the sake of the erotic action.
Experience, trademark.
The Inquisitors live in and operate out of a towering Gothic castle, the halls of which are filled with torture machines, holding cells, and macabre trophies from their kills. In Rebels, we see the Grand Inquisitor using the literal petrified corpse of a master as a trap for other Jedi. In Fallen Order, when you reach the Fortress Inquisitorius, you're basically working your way through a dungeon until getting to an interrogation chamber. The Inquisitorius are physically and emotionally violent. They're users of evil magic that hunt children or the innocent. The Seventh Sister wears a pointed black helmet that very much harkens to popular ideas of medieval witches. Describing the Legends Inquisition, the Dark Side Sourcebook says that at their disposal are sophisticated instruments of torture no living being should ever have to see, let alone suffer. It might be a stretch, but I also think we can read the double-bladed spinning lightsaber along these lines too. An over-engineered, brutal weapon along the lines of the most over-the-top exaggeration of Spanish inquisitorial torture methods. Which again, the Spanish Inquisition did torture people. They just didn't invent the goddamn combustion engine to do it or whatever. And yeah, grotesque medievalism isn't just in Star Wars. There are inquisitions in Warhammer. These are ideas that are just generally part of our culture.
People love to like these days make a medieval movie where everything is just terrible and dirty. That's just just-
days.
Yeah.
Monty Python did it. Shout out to Monty Python.
Again.
There are, of course, plenty of notable differences between the Spanish Inquisition and the Imperial one. The Spanish Inquisition itself varied in its structure, but again, unlike the Imperial Inquisitorius, it's a bureaucracy. It was officially named the Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It was a legal structure.
Cool name. Tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Like,
In Star Wars, we've seen basically no members beyond Inquisitors, Inquisitors to be their military command structure, and some like servants and droids. There's no court or anything. The Imperial Inquisition was also seemingly not corrupt. Under the Empire, they do their job with very little mercy. In Spain, you could pay off the Inquisition to convince them not to investigate or pursue a target. And yeah, the Inquisitors killed most of the people they get their hands on, but the Spanish didn't. The witch hunts were much more, witch hunts. The term is now synonymous with the trial where the outcome is predetermined. The Imperial Inquisitorius itself is kind of a cheeky inversion of that idea. Given their mystical connections to the Force, they're witches hunting other witches. But of course, unlike Star Wars, there's no reason to think that anyone who's condemned by witch trials actually had supernatural power. The devil isn't real.
no, I think that Goody Proctor was a witch.
All of that aside, I do think there's something interesting to be found in comparing the goals of our real-world examples and the Inquisitorius. Both the Spanish Inquisition and historical witch trials were enacted on paper to combat heresy, to defend Christianity from false beliefs and other faiths. Witchfinders and High Inquisitors were often portrayed as people doing holy, righteous work to combat evil. Despite Inquisitors being former Jedi themselves, they aren't Sith. They aren't a religious group, and indeed, they're surprisingly secular for a bunch of people who use the Force and twirl lightsabers around.
So they're like Scientology in that they're a religion, but like a really weird, like science-y secular one.
Yes, the Inquisitorius, like the Path of the Open Hand, are Scientologists. The Inquisitors don't venerate their masters or the dark side. There's no religious rite or action. All that's left is the mechanical use of the Force in obligatory service to the Emperor. There's no deference or respect there. The Inquisitorius doesn't hunt the Jedi because they believe the wrong thing or worship incorrectly.
They hunt them because it's their job.
Yeah, they kill Jedi because they hate Jedi, often because they're told to, and any system of belief is essentially torn away from them with the loss of the Jedi Order. But even if we did consider Inquisitors Sith, since they study Sith texts and train under Darth Vader, this wouldn't really settle it. Because in the era of the Galactic Empire, we can't really so easily label the Sith as a faith tradition. There's no larger Sith order. It's just two dudes in their wacky totalitarian political project, right? Instead, it's the Sith who are worshipped. Their names are spoken in processions deep beneath the surface of Exegol by the cultists of the Sith Eternal. The dark side becomes subservient to their wills, and that's how they do terrible things, which is in contrast to the Jedi, who seek to work with the Force through the Force. But anyway, the hypersecular Inquisitor view of the dark side seems clear when we compare it to the ancient Sith, because in the 2020 run of Dr. Aphra, we see something very curious. The arc in question introduced a unique cult of ancient technological innovators called the Ascendant, who tried to use their advanced knowledge to replicate and even potentially match Force sensitivity, culminating in the Spark Eternal, an artificial intelligence designed to unify an organic body with their technology. And so, the Sith of the time launch an Inquisition. In the heart of an Ascendant temple, they slaughtered the cult members in order to eliminate their faith, because they were doing heresy. At least that's how the ancient Sith saw it.
It's a little perverse, but like...
Machines building machines.
Yes, machines building machines. How perverse. No, I don't know. Maybe this is just my like...
Anti-transhumanist.
Sure, anti-transhuman. Maybe, I don't know, my Christianity speaking, but it feels like a little fucking weird to try and unite like human and machine all in one go.
I mean, there are reasons why it is both fine and reasonable for that to happen in Star Wars. I've kind of talked about the subject before, not on the podcast, on Twitter. But the Ascendant weren't cool. Like, the Ascendant were
bad.
weird, fucked up
Okay.
guys.
And this is in the period of the Sith Empire.
I think so. It's
Okay,
not clear,
so this
but
is
I
like
would,
an actual Inquisition.
it
then.
is during a time when Sith rule. It is not definitively in the
Sith
Old
rule
Republic
a
Sith
lot.
Empire. Yeah.
Question, is there any evidence other than the Galactic Empire that the Sith are actually particularly bad as rulers of the galaxy?
I think they were.
Okay.
Just kind of that's the vibe, right?
Because like
I think they did they did
the
imperialism,
will
right?
to power, right? The will to power does not necessarily imply like brutality in the pursuit of that, right? Like if you are a Sith and your thing to pursue is like political power, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be like some brutal asshole who just murders people for no reason.
Yeah, but the Sith Empire was brutal assholes who
Okay,
murdered people.
well that's what I was asking.
Darth
like,
Nihilus ate a fucking planet. Multiple fucking planets? I can't
How
remember.
do you eat a planet?
Force shit.
Oh, like ate it through the. He didn't like. I was trying to like rehabilitate the Sith there, but it didn't work.
The problem with the Sith is that it's not just the will to power shit. It's that they're also assholes. You have to be an asshole to harness the dark side of the Force. That's how that works. So, Darksiders are no stranger to religious inquisition, but that's not what the Imperial Inquisition is, which means we have to talk about the Inquisitorius' relationship to the governing body they work for, because the Inquisitors operate for and on behalf of the Empire. They commanded deployments of stormtroopers, traveled with specially trained death squads of purge troopers, they could take control of Imperial Star Destroyers to aid on hunts, and among its dungeons, the Fortress Inquisitorius holds boardrooms, Imperial officers, and a hangar bay containing a squadron of TIEs. The Inquisitorius existed for the sake of erasing the physical and cultural influence of the Jedi after the Purge. It was about vendetta, bigotry, and galactic control after the major political upset of the post-war period. Again, quoting the Dark Side sourcebook, an Imperial Inquisitor is a hammer designed to pound the galaxy into a shape the Empire finds most pleasing. It's about power. Indeed, the Spanish Inquisition was a tactic deployed after the Reconquista to exert control and centralize culture. Witch trials in Europe could be argued as a form of primitive accumulation, a way to diminish the social power of women to ease the transition from feudalism to capitalism. And all this brings us to the place where we need to, regrettably, talk about the Holocaust. Trigger warning for concentration camp shit. When Hitler was appointed chancellor and the Nazis began to consolidate power, the first target was Jewish people. Anti-Semitism was deep-seated in European society, sometimes as a result of their portrayal as Christ killers by Christian authorities. So a lot of Germans hated the Jews, and the Nazis hated the Jews. So even more Germans became supporters of the Nazis. But even more than being Christ killers, Jewish people were seen as dirty, as detestable, as leeches on society. So this bigotry carried with it the implication that if we got rid of them, society and the nation would be better. And of course, it wasn't just the Jews. The Nazis brutalized and imprisoned Romani, who faced a similar strain of European racism as Jewish people did. They went after gay and, more quietly, trans people for their supposed degeneracy and lack of contribution to the growth of the Aryan population. People were accused of being unwilling to work, and many of those who were disabled and unable to do labor would often be sterilized. So as a part of this targeted bigotry is practical justification. This type of person harms society, and the state will get rid of them. Implicitly, the state is doing vital work in its genocides, and the nation of people living under it are defined and reified in opposition to the ones they hate. It's both ideological and tactical. You build a nation state on the bones of the ones that you hate. But sometimes you don't have the very literal privilege of being a Gentile or straight or able-bodied. Occasionally, you're in one of those targeted groups. So what do you do to survive?
You become a capo.
You throw stones just like everyone else, so that hopefully they'll know that you're one of the good ones. And if the stones are already coming at you, well, maybe you can stand behind the guys next to you in order to live another day. Better them than me, right? In 1939, after they invaded Poland, Nazi Germany set up a camp west of the Polish town Stutthof. It went from civilian internment camp to a labor education camp to a concentration camp. Maybe as many as 100,000 people were sent through the Stutthof camp, laboring in nearby factories, brickyards, and other work sites. Typhus spread through the camp multiple times and killed many in its wake. Those who the SS guards deemed unfit for work were killed in a small Zyklon B gas chamber. These SS men were brutal, and they were cruel, too. Executions aside, the violent beatings they'd inflict on prisoners would often also lead to death. But here's the thing. If you're Nazi Germany, you only have so many SS members.
And you have more important manpower resources to think of. Like, you gotta fight the Russians and...
Yeah, you gotta pay your guards, which means less money you can pour into waging a failing war across Europe, right? So how do you maintain control of the prisoners in your concentration camps? You get everybody in on it, baby. You establish the prisoner functionary. Camp inmates are given little bits of responsibility to keep other prisoners in line. They help run the place, and in return, they're excused from the worst of the labor and punishment. When a hierarchy is created that makes victims target victims, it's a surprisingly effective way to keep them all down. These functionaries made up as much as 10% of the inmate workforce. Most prisoners despised them and nicknamed them
capos.
Capos.
Which I don't remember what that means, but it's not nice.
It's not clear where it sprung up, and it's got a few different proposed etymological sources.
The German for camp police is something like Kampfschlagen Policia or something like that. So I think that might be one.
It's a good guess.
Theory.
I think there's also a theory that it's like an Italian word for like chief or like in charge or something. I can't really remember. They saw them as henchmen of the Nazis. Many were especially brutal and beat prisoners as much as any SS guard for the slightest infringements. And of course, the cruelty was the point, so the Nazis often selected capos to fit that role. Many were specifically picked for their experience in violent gangs before their imprisonment. Some capos attempted to be fair and to use their power to even save lives, but if the SS found out, well, Himmler put it best. The minute we are not satisfied with him, he stops being a capo and goes back to sleeping with the others. He knows only too well that they will kill him on the first night. In early 1945, nearly 50,000 prisoners were evacuated from the Stutthof camp as Soviet forces gained territory. Over 4,000 were sent via boat to Germany. Something around 5,000 were forced into the Baltic Sea and cut down by guards with machine guns. Many others were marched towards eastern Germany in severe winter weather. Over 25,000 prisoners were killed in this evacuation. Capos, fulfilling their roles, helped facilitate this atrocity on behalf of camp guards at every step of the way. At the end of the Second World War, the Stutthof trials were held as a way for Polish officials to do justice by the victims of the camp. Guards were tried, accused of brutality and war crimes and all that shit, and several capos were also put on trial. A good portion were given time in prison, but those found to have behaved with especial cruelty were put to death. Capos have historically been seen only as perpetrators, complicit in the violence of the camps. And in many instances, they were. Those capos who were Jewish are viewed especially unkindly, considering just how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Some modern people use the term capo to slur Jews who aren't sufficiently pro-Israel or Zionist, which obviously sucks ass. But capos were also victims, and were forced into the rules of cruelty they played. Historian Dan Perrott put it best, saying, "The human stories revealed in the capo trials demonstrate the complexity of the position of victims, a complexity that we must comprehend if we wish truly to understand and to the degree possible overcome the Holocaust." Not to make light of the Holocaust, but I'm gonna pivot back to Star Wars now.
Yeah, so the Inquisitors are victims as much as they are perpetrators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really important to remember whenever we are talking about this sort of thing, right? Because so often what happens is victims of a thing become collaborators in the thing that is being done to them. And that's bad, obviously, but you can't always fully blame them for their participation in that.
Well, you have to recognize that it's complicated even if we are blaming them. We're going to stay on this topic. I'm going to spoil what is probably the biggest twist from the game Jedi Survivor. So if you want to avoid that, and if you care, you want to avoid that, check the show description for the timestamp to skip to. During the Clone Wars, Bode Akuna was a Jedi assigned to intelligence missions, going undercover behind enemy lines for the Republic. So when Order 66 was given and the Republic became the Empire, he had just the skill set he needed in order to stay hidden and survive. In hiding, he met a woman, Tayala, and they had a daughter together named Kata. They stayed safe on the planet Biren as a family, but one day the Inquisitors came knocking on the Akuna's door. In a twist of miserable luck, Bode and his daughter were out running errands. Only Tayala was home. She sent a message telling them not to come back, and while she was killed by the Inquisition, her family escaped alive. At that point, Bode was willing to do anything to keep his daughter safe. He believed the Inquisitorius would find him somehow eventually if he kept running. So he contacted a former Republic officer, Lank Denvik, who worked with and even mentored Bode during the war. Denvik had become a supervisor in the ISB, so Akuna cut a deal with him. Denvik would protect him and his daughter from the Imperial hunt in return for Bode's work as an agent. Bode infiltrated rebel groups. He was able to get in with the partisans in a way no operative before him had succeeded to. He cozied up to the Jedi insurgent Cal Kestis, and as a result found his way to the Hidden Path, a network of safe houses helping Force sensitives avoid the Empire's wrath, all the while sending information to the ISB. Bode got plenty of rebels and Jedi alike killed, selling them out to ensure his safety and that of his daughter. Obviously in this we see a material incentive. Bode, as with all people like him, has a target on his back. From his perspective, his and Kata's lives can be bought with the blood of others. Better them than us. Genocide is morally complicated. I'm not going to pretend that what Bode does is okay, but I get it.
Can you blame him? Right.
A little.
Well,
a little.
But you know what I mean?
I get it.
Who am I to say? What would I do if I was in that situation?
I am Cal Kestis, the protagonist and playable character of Jedi Survivor that he stabs in the back and does bad things to. Bode Akuna hurt me personally.
Okay.
I I have made my peace with Bode, but I rewatched a bunch of those fucking cutscenes last week while writing this, and it still got me. It still broke my fucking heart. So I don't feel normal about Bode, but yeah, it's complicated. Similarly, every single Inquisitor was a Jedi. They're all Force sensitive, fighting for an empire that thinks of their kind as uniquely traitorous. So let's talk about why that is. Why would you ally yourself ideologically with systems that think people like you shouldn't exist? One reason is pretty obvious: survival. When the prison guards are going to shoot you unless you harm your fellow prisoners, you may as well do what they say. Trilla Siduri and Masana Tide survived Order 66 through whatever luck they had, but were both captured by the Empire and subjected to torture and indoctrination before they became the 2nd and 9th sisters in the Inquisitorius. Iscot Akaris, who became the 13th sister, saw a fellow Jedi killed by the clones and felt she had no other choice but to accept Palpatine's offer. These Inquisitors were put in a position where they had to choose between their own morals and their survival, and they chose the latter. But there are also much less sympathetic incentives too. It's a less weighty example than the fucking Holocaust, but this topic leads me invariably to think about queer people who peddle right-wing talking points. Gays Against Groomers, the Log Cabin Republicans, Blair White, Dave Rubin,
Caitlyn Jenner.
People who should fucking know better. People who like to use their minority status to pull a hashtag not your shield for conservative hate
Also known
movements.
as my retirement plan.
Straight people, cis people, and especially men tend to prefer to not consider the existence of those identities. Cis is a slur and all that. They hate having to think about themselves that way because they've never been forced to, because they're not marginalized. People like to feel like they're reasonably normal and good people, so it can be uncomfortable to hear that bigotry is real, that people carry sexist and homophobic and transphobic ideas with them in their day-to-day lives. People prefer not to be challenged, to not have to call into question core but incorrect assumptions about what they think a woman is, how marriage has to be, or how people can have sex. If you validate that, if you take that discomfort and bigotry and don't stand up for yourself or make demands of the world you live in, that can be comforting to those people. It may be self-destructive. You may debase yourself by appealing continually to people who see your love or your children or your identity as absurd and gross. But there will be a certain subset of people who will tolerate that and benefit politically from it. You can make a lot of money from it and get a lot of attention, and maybe those are things you want more than your dignity.
I don't care about my dignity. This is why I said it's my retirement plan because, provided I don't have a career, I know that as a young, in theory, able to pass transgender, that you can, in fact, just go and be a right-wing asshole and make money off of it. It's insane. The grift.
It would pay more than what you're doing right now.
Oh my God, would it?
There's also the practice of drawing a line between the type of marginalized person you are versus the more distasteful, more dangerous, the ickier ones. You're one of the good ones. This can be an external self-preservationary tactic, but more often than not, it's a psychological one. Saving face, saving your ego by pointing the finger away from yourself and passing along the shame of otherness onto someone slightly weirder than you.
This is, of course, untrue in my case, since I am actually one of the good ones.
This is especially relevant in the context of queer community, because we've been doing this for decades in every subcategory, throwing the weirder ones under the bus. Femme lesbians have done it to butches, masked gay men have done it to twinks, attempting to push out and marginalize people who are more gender non-conforming. It's true.
I think but the idea of specifically targeting
the twinks,
the twinks.
Twink phobia is real.
Trying to target the twinks for marginalization is quite funny, I think. And they might deserve it, honestly.
They don't deserve
They
to
probably
be...
also would like it.
No. Some twinks are tops. Do you know that?
I don't believe it. That's fake. That's fake news. That's misinformation.
Right now, we're seeing this tactic with some cis gay people trying to push down trans people, and binary trans people throwing down non-binary ones, or even just trans people who don't pass as well as others. Hell, this approach is most of what makes up kink at pride discourse. This is the question of assimilation versus liberation. Assimilation being the integration of an oppressed people within their oppressive culture without fundamentally challenging it. And liberation, it's what it says on the tin. It's changing the repressive culture so you can actually live in it, accepted for your difference. Ultimately, an assimilationist attitude towards queerness can be highly amenable to this type of outgroup setting, a political sublimation of the feelings of distaste you feel for yourself and stranger queer people, or the displacement of the harm you experience from your culture onto people otherwise like you. saying, if you weren't so weird and perverted and tasteless,
Then they would be nice to me.
yeah, if you did more work to be normal and fit into how straight people act, the way cis people look, what men want from us, then they wouldn't hate us. They wouldn't be persecuting us.
Unlikely, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a fucking lie. It's a fucking lie. The ones who hate us think we're all degenerates. They're not gonna care if you're a femme cis lesbian. You still threaten a straight status quo by dating other women. And once they take care of people like me, you're next, Becky.
I don't know. It's a temptation I feel, certainly. I don't know if Eleanor feels it because she's a better person than me. But,
It's complicated.
you know, I am like, in theory, one of the most acceptable types of trans people. You know, like, oh, look at me. I go to college. Oh, I have a job. Oh, I go to church. Oh, I'm so like socially normal.
You're not straight.
Fuck off. But like, you see where I'm coming from is like, there is a temptation to be like, I am so normal. I'm so normal. Don't persecute me. I'm so normal. Like,
Get them.
They don't
Get all of them instead.
they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit.
No.
I don't know. I could become like a trad wife and they would still think that I'm a degenerate. Because it doesn't matter how much of a like good transsexual or good homosexual or good whatever you are, because they don't hate you because you're not a good transsexual or
They
a good
hate you
whatever. They
because you're
hate
a
you because you're a
transsexual.
transsexual or a.
They
but,
hate
like,
you because you're a queer person.
They hate you because you're queer, not because you're not a good queer.
And listen, there
'Cause
might
there are
be
no good queers.
there might be types of queerness that you don't understand. That's none of your damn business. Those people are still your family. Get over yourself. All right.
No, the only reason I'm not like one of these stupid right-wing grifters is not because I'm like a good person, because I'm not, or because like I don't hold all of these horrible internalized transphobia and queerphobia, whatever bullshit. I have enough self-hatred to like recognize the view that they have of me and be like, it's no good trying to put that on someone else because that's not going to fix the problem.
Sophie, I think you are vastly underplaying the role in which your self-awareness, empathy, and frankly, systemic thinking play into this, because
That's gay shit.
yeah, okay, moving on. I think this is the sort of ego-saving approach taken by people like Proset Dibs, who turns on the Order during the Clone Wars because he believes they've lost their way, and likely willingly joins the Inquisitorius, basically giving up on any Jedi values entirely just because he didn't like the way the Council was doing things. I can only assume that Proset Dibs went on to star in a PragerU video titled "The Reason I Left the Left" or something. The Jedi Council got too woke.
The Jedi Council, the slippery slope of the gays.
Oh, and it's like the Jedi Council did suck during the Clone Wars, but like,
Not that bad.
if I left the Jedi Order, I simply wouldn't join the Inquisitorius afterwards.
No,
you know?
I would just go have a life.
Yeah, work to bring down the Empire, you know?
Move to Denver. No, this is the cure for all of like the conservative gays. Move to Denver. That's where your people are.
That's what Proset Dibs should do.
Move to Denver.
It also feels like Reva, who became the third sister. She survived Order 66 as a youngling after having been run through by Darth Vader. It was only her hate, her resentment of both Vader and the Jedi Order that kept her alive. Her trauma, her pain and fury, she embraced them. Refusing to ever move on, she kept blaming the Jedi for her vulnerability, for the abuse she endured at the hands of the Empire. And despite joining the Inquisitorius to get revenge on Vader, she also spent years perpetuating that same type of harm throughout the galaxy. Reva was hurt at a very young age by a system that was designed to cause her pain. And instead of trying to preserve her relationship to the Force, to who she is, she lashes out and helps the Empire hurt others as well. When we boil it down to named characters that aren't minor name drops or mobile game holograms, the gender disparity in known Order 66 survivors is stark. It's 2-to-1, men to women, twice as many. Our Jedi main characters around this time tend largely to be men, with women usually serving as supporting characters. This is also true with regard to race. It's usually, but not always, white guys. Non-white people tend to be in support roles. And while it's less bad in a real-world context, we tend not to follow non-humans in center roles either. I don't bring this up as an argument for improved racial and gender representation, though if you want that to be your takeaway here, be my guest. I bring it up to highlight that members of these groups, the ones who don't get the center stage role in our real world or in the fiction of Star Wars, comprise the entirety of the Inquisitorius. Now, part of that is that I assume Lucasfilm was trying to make up for its lack of non-male, non-white baddies. It's cool that we've got a couple women of color getting to wield red lightsabers on screen now.
Oh, this is like one of those like more female Lockheed Martin CEOs thing.
It's much more neutral because it's Star
Although the
Wars.
thing about Lockheed, I'm not going to talk about Lockheed Martin, but Lockheed Martin is a really weird relationship to the queer community. It's like basically the best place to work in the world if you're gay or trans or whatever.
All military contractors care about is
can you make stuff that blows people up?
Military money.
Welcome to the U.S. defense industry.
In a thematic analysis, every Inquisitor can be read as marginalized in some way. The lack of people who aren't old white human dudes in the Empire is noticeable. However, none of the Inquisitorius is white men. Over 80% are non-human aliens, and half of the Inquisitorius is comprised of women, which is actually the correct amount. Hell, even Bodakuna is a mixed-race man. His actor has Japanese and Parsi parents. The Inquisitorius, as an organization of alien species and women of color, is full of traumatized collaborators working for a patriarchal, white, imperialist force, often hunting down white guys, which I'm not going to unpack, but still, they're people who are like them, targets on the basis of who they are. The Ninth Sister screams about wanting to break Cal Kestis, to make him suffer like she had to. The Second Sister works to acquire a list of the names of Force-sensitive children across the galaxy to be snatched like she was as a Padawan. The Grand Inquisitor, the Seventh Sister, and the Eighth Brother pursue two Jedi relentlessly, just to stifle whatever they can of their dying order. And all the while, they're still being maimed and abused by Darth Vader and the Imperial structure. The Inquisitorius can be allegorically read as a group of marginalized people who, instead of resisting, instead of living in community or trying to make a better culture or world, assimilate into a state that continues to harm them. They don't always have a choice, it's not always on them, but it's still what happens, and they perpetuate that harm even when it's still being done to them. Trauma can't be expected to be a teaching tool. All pain is guaranteed to do is damage people, but cycles of violence can be broken. Reva is a testament to that. After confronting Vader and losing, she goes to Tatooine grievously injured. And even away from it all, she still lashes out. She still kidnaps and nearly kills a Force-sensitive child. But she considers the way she was hurt. She realizes that she's not protecting herself, not gaining power. She's just treading in the footprints of the man who wounded her when she was a kid. And she chooses to stop, to be free, to ditch the red lightsaber, to no longer use her trauma as an excuse to hurt people the same way. And she gives the boy she took a chance at a life she never had. Grease put it best. We all know it's a rigged game, but we choose how to play. Play well, I guess. Yeah,
Fucked up.
It's pretty fucked up.
Just maybe, I don't know. We all, when we're young, all of us get to have something horrible happen to us in one way or another, if we're queer. Like, it's just a fact of life. You're going to have horrible trauma in some way. Sorry. It's just the way things are.
It's part of it. It's part of it.
And maybe choose as an adult who has choices to not make other people live out that same thing.
Be an adult, you know?
Grow up, don't be a bitch. Like, just because you have had horrible shit happen to you does not mean that you need to make it happen to other people.
And learn. Think, no one else has to go through what I did, even if they're not the same type of person as me. Grow up.
Be an adult. Be normal.
Be normal. All we say is be normal. You know what the Inquisitor should have done?
Thing.
Be normal.
Be normal.
Be normal.
Like, and I don't mean normal as in like, heterosexual, cis, straight, white man. I mean, be normal. Don't
just be chill.
Worry so much about other people and what they're doing.
This type of person who's different from me?
Live your life, worry about your friends and family and your job or lack thereof, and just be normal.
Get a hobby.
Mind your own business.
I like that the conclusion of last episode was touch grass, and this one is mind your own business.
Yeah.
We're just your fucking grandmas.
We are your grandparents. Go outside. Go to a park, right? Don't do this in your backyard. That's weird antisocial suburbanite behavior.
Backyard?
If they have one. Go to the park, find a hill, sit on it, touch some grass, and mind your own business.
And tell your mom you love her.
Enjoy the sunshine. Tell your mom you love her. Clean your room.
Shit. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become Jordan Peterson. You want to read some emails?
Oh, do I?
So we have a lot of emails.
We have a shit ton of emails.
So right now, we're just going to dip our toes in. Maybe we'll try to get out a lot of these later. Our first email is from June. June says, "Hey daughters, my name is June and I'm a fellow trans sister, still somewhat in the closet from Portugal. So I just wanted to say up front how refreshing and valuable to me it is to have people like you both talking on these topics and sharing your unique perspectives from both a female and queer point of view, which as we all know can be hard to find online for stuff like Star Wars." Yeah, I'm with you, June. I'll try not to make this too long, but I've been known to be hopelessly long-winded, so I can make no promises. So I just got done listening to your most recent episode, Resistance, Rebellion, and Revolution, and I wanted to present not so much a refutation of the points made on revolution, but more of a different perspective. The thought I had was that not everyone is afforded the chance at the peaceful overthrow of an authoritarian regime. It can be a privilege to be able to organize and subvert a ruling government through nonviolent means, especially when said government holds a monopoly on force and is very keen and willing to use it on any dissenting voice or activity. For some added context, being from Portugal, I actually come from one of the few countries who had what is largely considered a peaceful revolution. On the 25th of April 1974, we had the Carnation Revolution, named as such due to the people passing around carnations for the soldiers to put on the barrels of their rifles. This revolution had almost no shots fired and led to the dissolution of our decades-long fascist isolationist authoritarian regime. I'm bringing this up because I think it's a good example of how the specific material realities of the movement in the time this happened are a good illustration of how this isn't always realistic. Because in spite of its peaceful nature, this revolution was still a military coup. The only reason it didn't turn into a bloodbath is because the vast majority of the military apparatus had been organized by leftist military leaders to march on the seat of power of our country. So for those few moments, the government no longer had a monopoly on violence, and therefore the threat of overwhelming violence on an already weakened, falling apart at the seams state apparatus, and the unexpected immediate overwhelming popular support made them relinquish power with next to no resistance. All of this to ask, do you think that this type of outcome, or the ones you talked about like in Serbia and Poland, can be realistically expected of everyone and or prescribed to people facing conditions where they have to use violence at the bare minimum to defend themselves? Anyways, love the pod, daughters. Keep being awesome, and sorry for the overly long email and the lack of Star Wars reference. Whoops. No, I know you're fine about the Star Wars thing.
That works for me. I don't know anything about Star Wars. Obviously, I don't know if I made this distinction in the episode, but there is a difference between... there's in Myanmar right now, or Myanmar, I don't remember how you're supposed to say it, but it's a country in Eastern Asia, formerly known as Burma. And what is going on there kind of at the moment is a civil war because, what was her name? Aung San Suu Kyi, I think? I'm terribly mispronouncing that, I apologize. But she had been the first democratically elected leader in a very, 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 very long time in Myanmar. And the military overthrew her and has been, consequently kind of engaged in what is at the least ethnic cleansing against a certain Islamic minority in the country, an Islamic ethnic minority in the country. And so kind of as a result of this, they and certain groups are engaged in a civil war against the government to defend themselves from being eradicated by military force. And that is always going to be a necessity sometimes. But most of the time, that's not the situation under an authoritarian regime. The situation is normally not, this authoritarian regime comes into power specifically with the intent of destroying a minority within the country.
Nazi shit.
Yeah, Nazi shit. Nazi shit is actually relatively rare among authoritarian regimes. Mostly what they want to do is rule the country they have and get obscenely wealthy off of doing it. So I would say, obviously, in a situation like that, yeah, pull out the, what are they still using, like Mosin Nagants or AK-47s there probably, just really old military shit. Pull out your family's trusty old AK-47 and get blasting. But I am going to say that in most cases, what you talk about of the soldiery, the military, and the state apparatus defecting from the government to the uprising or to the revolution is what normally happens. I mean, it even happened in the Soviet Union, right? Where in the early days of the October Revolution, all the sailors and all the a good portion of the soldiers went over to the Reds. So I would say that that is something that should be prescribed for the majority of people in the majority of authoritarian regimes, is to organize to get the civil society and the elites, co-opt the elites to your side and make a go of going at it peacefully, because it's almost guaranteed to have a better outcome and you might not end up killing anyone, which is also good.
Well, and when it comes to large-scale political questions, we have to acknowledge between what is just and what works, sometimes you have to go with what works. And that's not to say, you should uphold a terrible authoritarian regime because some people might die if you don't, but, you weigh shit and you figure it out.
Well, and this is why you might actually be familiar with this since you're from Portugal and it's just right across the border from you. The Spanish government in the post-Franco period, when the dictatorship collapsed and they democratized, didn't really prosecute anyone who had worked or collaborated with the Francoist regime. And they did this because it was the only way to get them all on board with the new democracy thing. And it, almost didn't work, and the king had had to avert a coup. But the simple fact of the matter is that sometimes when you are trying to get rid of a bad government and replace it with one that is fine, because that's what you get, sorry, no such thing as a good government, it's inherent in the nature of the state, you're gonna have to make some compromises. And while we might feel as though we all have the right to overthrow places by violence, and we do, it just doesn't work, and it's gonna end up worse for your country afterwards, because not only are you gonna be devastated by a civil war, like Myanmar is one of those countries that is very dependent on foreign tourism dollars for being able to have an economy, and because they're having a civil war right now, very bad things are happening because no one's traveling to visit the country anymore. Obviously, you can't blame the people who are doing what they're doing because they are literally fighting for their lives, but it is impoverishing the country on a huge scale very rapidly.
What's the trade-off, right? Do we allow an ethnic group to be cleansed, or do we keep the government functioning? And I think resisting genocide is one of the best things you can do, kind of unequivocally, but it might destabilize some other things.
These things have consequences. It will throw your country into a state of enhanced poverty. Not to say that Myanmar has ever been a rich country, but it's a lot poorer now than it was. Obviously, they are justified and this is what they should be doing. But if it can be avoided in any case, it should be avoided because it will do bad things to you.
Yeah.
Overthrowing authoritarian regimes is complicated, and there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution, but I tend to believe that the long, slow thing, the boring thing that no one wants to do, is going to work better in almost all cases.
History moment. Thank you very, very much, June, for your email. Our last email is from Dan, Star Wars Centralized. Hi, Dan. I love Dan. Everyone go follow Dan on Twitter. Dan says, Bright Suns, Daughters of Ferrix. Ah, that's clever. Sophie, for context, Bright Suns is the greeting that people give on Batuu. Batuu is the planet that the theme park Galaxy's Edge is technically set on. It's what the cast members say and shit. Anyway, Bright Suns, Daughters. I'm a recent fan, but have now listened to all the episodes, and I like the podcast a lot. Really great hearing your unique perspectives on the franchise I love so dearly. You are both also very funny. Thanks, Dan.
I don't know about that.
I'm a Christian, Protestant, and first jumped on board to listen to your Path of the Open Hand episode, and found your analysis and commentary really wonderful. I've had lots of brushes with fundamentalists in real life, and can definitely see how the Path reflects that in a nuanced and scarily real way. As a High Republic fan, the Phase 2 recap was also very well done. I'm very much someone who views the church in an Acts 2, 44 through 46 way, and I think Christian nationalism and a lot of American Christianity is so harmful to what Jesus actually intended for his followers, but I digress. In regard to Christianity in general, something I've thought about is how the Republic interacts with the Jedi Order, and how that reflects on how some historical religious institutions have been deeply ingrained in government. And after that, how post-Order 66, Luke and Rey Skywalker seem to be reforming the Order in ways similar, but definitely not identical, to the Protestant Reformation. My beloved Last Jedi in particular has some seriously Reformation-type events and theological statements, such as the persistence of the Jedi texts, and therefore religion, despite the burning of a now insignificant ancient library/church. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, or something related to it, if any. By the way, I'm also someone who's very passionate about public transit and anti-car-centric infrastructure/capitalism. So Sophia, I appreciate all your comments on that subject. It's been really awesome to find such a unique Star Wars podcast that talks about so many things I'm interested in, and one which widens my horizons on so many different topics almost every episode. Loved the Resistance/Rebellion/Revolution discussions in the last episode. Can't wait to hear more. Dan, Star Wars Centralized.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
First of all, you don't have to email us back about this, but I'm going to guess that you're a Lutheran because only Lutherans love the Reformation that much. No offense to y'all. I'm not kidding. I grew up with some Lutheran friends, and they would have Reformation Day parties where they would have a whole big party and
Really?
celebrate the nailing of the theses to the door and such.
I didn't know this. I think that's kind of based, honestly.
It's fun. No, you see, the thing about Christianity, right, is I believe, the truth, right? But when it gets involved with government, bad stuff happens every time. Every time. We have this whole period in the Middle Ages where the Pope is basically in charge of Europe, and all of our most lovely Christian atrocities happen then. And then we have the period in the 1600s when everyone gets really upset about what kind of Christians other people are. And then we have the 30 Years' War over that. And yeah, one of the many important parts of Christianity is render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, yours, and unto God what is God's. The gospel is not a call to Christian domination over political institutions. That is actually quite antithetical to the whole thing. That's a big concern of mine as well, is both from like a missional perspective, right? In that everyone in this country now believes that Christianity is just this kind of psychotic right-wing thing that you do when you hate gay people and immigrants, because Jesus hated immigrants. And it's becoming, once again, something very tied up with the government, and look at all the lovely fruit that is bearing.
I've said this before, but with regard to the Jedi, I think the way we have to frame it is as less of an issue of separation of church and state and more of an issue of separation of state and church, because it's not really the Republic that's harmed by the Jedi. It's the Jedi who are harmed by the Republic. I'm sure we'll talk about this much more at a later date. Thanks, Dan, for making me read the first scripture reference I have in 6 years.
Pretty base scripture
longer.
Reference, right? It's like it's the Jesus communism moment of the Bible.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to this email, Dan. I'm a big fan of all of the takes that you have. I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks when we will have a hard return to not talking about the church. I love my deeply held atheist beliefs that neither God nor heaven exist, and that I get to simply rest after I am dead by being a corpse. I like that I will cease to exist as I want to someday. Shout out to all the atheists in the chat.
But the thing about Christianity is you do cease to exist. You are annihilated as an individual by the love of God and become one with the divine.
Citation needed.
Not citation needed.
The thing about my thing, Sophie, is that
I know,
it's
I'm just...
true. All right.
Oh, you see, I was going to say the same thing about my thing. So, I don't know, your local Episcopal Church has Mass at 10:30 this Sunday.
Your local Daughters of Ferrix is on Twitter. Go follow us and don't go to church. For I am your one true God. All right. If you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com. Don't be afraid of the backlog. Eventually...
We'll just do like episode 20 where we just read emails at this point, because they're starting to be a really serious problem.
We'll figure it out.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every other Wednesday, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts, on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, or follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix. I've been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Sophie, what about you?
You can find me at Sophia in SLC on Twitter. Also at @TheRedLine_pod, which is about public transportation, urban planning, and how we can make our cities better.
This episode was written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller, and co-written by my friend Harrison. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.
Be normal. That was our takeaway.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.